Pantheon is one of Riot's more recent reworks, and ever since his re-release, he has spent a lot of time as a contested or permaban champion, being played mid, top, and in the jungle. His kit has a ton of built-in power with point-and-click CC, a semi-global ultimate, an E that defies all reason, and a versatile high damage Q. Today, we'll be looking at how Mr. Unchained recently reached 400 LP in Grandmasters, completely one-tricking Pantheon support, and why it actually makes a lot of sense. To start, let's talk about Pantheon's abilities for a bit. His W, E, and R all have a ton of inherent value that do not at all rely on stats or items, right? W is always going to stun, E is always going to block a ton of damage, and R is always going to be this incredible tool for moving around the map and turning or starting a fight. Pantheon obviously does benefit from items, but his abilities don't need them to be crazy powerful, which is one of the hallmarks of a support champion, right? That their abilities are useful on low income, and Pantheon blows this requirement out of the water. And beyond that, he's no slouch in lane either, though his effectiveness does obviously vary depending on the matchup. But as we saw earlier, Mr. Unchained does play this pick literally every single game, so there's no ADC that he hasn't played with and no enemy bot lane he hasn't played against. Before we jump into the lane phase though, we also do want to point out that Pantheon support is a great invader as well. Normally, Pantheon does not want to start with his W, but as support, he can easily take his stun without any worry about his lane, leading to some easy, consequence-free kills. Once the lane starts, he has a very potent all-in early with Ignite, and excels with ADCs who can match that pressure. At level 3, his all-in becomes insanely potent with damage, CC, and an incredible damage mitigation tool with his E in these short fights. It's just insane how powerful he is at this point in the game. And the combo here is starting with a passive empowered W, instantly getting back 3 stacks of passive, Q, auto, into another passive empowered ability with E. This is a bread and butter, insanely strong combo. Another thing that makes Pantheon so overbearing is his ability to jump in, tank, then back out to safety and still influence the fight with his Q from range. Also, one of the really OP things about his E as Pantheon support is that he's pretty much always guaranteed to get full value from this Aegis Assault. In top lane or melee matchups mid, sometimes your opponent can just move around the ability, but this is insanely unlikely in bot lane with a lot of ranged and mobile champions or tanky slow supports. It really is just kind of crazy how tanky Pantheon gets in these early and mid game fights, usually rushing Tabi, often running Aftershock, more on runes later, and all that combined with his E, it's an enemy ADC's worst nightmare and allows Pantheon to play really aggressively. Now, you might think that Q is a really great poke tool, but we didn't see Mr. Unchained spamming Q for poke very often unless the enemy lane was stuck under towers so they had no kill pressure. He did sometimes soften them up a bit with Q, but mainly just wanted to save mana for all-ins. Speaking of towers, Pantheon is broken under tower, both enemy turrets and allied. Since his E blocks tower shots, he can start out a dive with no fear, easily tanking for his team. His E also makes him incredibly hard to dive, especially if buffed with passive, often baiting enemies into bad fights or wasting summoner spells. Now, you might be thinking that once you hit level 6, it's time to run top and ult, but we very rarely saw Mr. Unchained do this, often not even using his ult until level 9 or 10 even, which really stunned us. But what we noticed is that if he has kill pressure in lane, he doesn't want to risk throwing that by leaving his ADC for a minute to go gank. He really sticks to his lane if it's a good one, not running mid to gank, not ulting, just sticking to the same plan from pre-6. But in games where the lane is doomed, or against something like Azumi that is just insanely hard to kill, he will roam to devastating effect, able to just click and kill. Another pretty broken thing that we saw from Mr. Unchained is that when there's going to be a scuttle contest bottom with both junglers, he'll use his Q to push out the wave and move up to help. Very few supports can match both his ability to push the wave and win 3-minute skirmishes, so this is a really powerful tactic that you can easily use. And he can even just go grab it without the jungler too. And he often did the same thing to help his jungler secure Dragon, pushing then walking over to support since he's really strong in skirmishes at this point in the game. In the mid game, Pantheon continues to be a force as he and his ADC move mid, where he can now ult to the side lanes to easily turn those matchups in his team's favor. With this playstyle, Pantheon is able to pressure all 3 lanes at the same time, sitting mid, able to ult to top or bot in an instant. This level of global pressure is really something that very few other supports bring to the table, and Pantheon does it just as well if not better than some of these in the right situation. Now, in skirmishes and teamfights following lane phase, Pantheon relies a lot on what we're going to call unseen power. On the surface at this point in the game, he's not doing much damage, he doesn't have as much CC as other melee supports, and he also doesn't have as much health or pure tank stats either. But don't think for a second that that means he's useless. He's still able to land reliable instant CC onto anyone for picks or to peel his backline. He also reliably applies grievous wounds to multiple targets with Q and E. Beyond that, his E continues to be just an insane ability, often even more so in these grouped scenarios. I mean, just look at how much time he's able to buy here. Even if Kindred hadn't randomly ulted for no reason, he was able to tank 4 characters hitting him with his shield. And this really is how you want to be playing even teamfights in the late game. Just sitting back, peeling, and keeping everyone in front of you for max E value. The second you jump into the middle of a team, your E ceases to be giga broken, and you become pretty squishy. This teamfight is a great example of how to play in these dangerous 5v5s. Look at how he immediately turns to peel, volley, and wreck Zai rather than diving the enemy backline. He also saves his E for when a high damage threat, Xayah, moves near, completely negating her and CCing her when she overextends. So again, if your team has the numbers advantage, you can dive in and look for a pick, but in even close fights like this one, staying back and peeling is how you'll be most effective. Now, before we jump into the need to know stuff for you to start smurfing right out of the gate as Pantheon support, we want to make sure that you know all about skillcapped. Over on our website, we have over 800 of the absolute best guides for improving in League of Legends and so much more, including direct pro challenger coaching. In fact, if you don't significantly improve while actively using skillcapped, you can claim a full refund, no questions asked. So there's literally no risk. So be sure to sign up right after this to start climbing today. Alright, now that we've got a great idea of how powerful Pantheon support can be and how he functions in the game, let's get you set up so you can go try it. For runes, Mr. Unchained primarily runs an Aftershock setup that looks like this. However, he has recently been experimenting with a few other pages as well, namely a Guardian or Press the Attack page. So ultimately there are obviously a lot of options that you can pick from. However, Aftershock is going to be your most reliable standard option, but absolutely feel free to experiment with some other options if you feel so inclined. For build, you're always going to start out with your steel shoulder guards, then rush tier 2 boots. Usually tab eyes, but if you're against a ton of CC or an AP AD carry, then mercs for sure. After that, in almost every single game that Mr. Unchained plays, he goes Executioner's Calling next. This is another one of those hidden power moments for Pantheon support. Very few other supports can so easily provide grievous wounds, and not only does this obviously help reduce healing, but it also makes it so that your teammates don't have to so often interrupt their own builds to grab it. You've just made your teammates hit their spikes sooner and have more efficient itemization. After that core start, it gets a bit wild and branches off a lot. If your ADC is ahead and worth sticking by, he'll usually grab Knight's Vow next. But in games like this where his MF ended the game 0-6, he opted to go for Black Cleaver into Stoneplate. Ultimately, the core build that we saw him head for most frequently was a mix of Knight's Vow, Locket, and Black Cleaver in varying order depending on how fed he was and how much he wanted to protect his teammates. As for skill order, he pretty much exclusively goes W, Q, E, then prioritizes like this. Alright, that wraps it up for our spotlight on Mr. Unchained and his Pantheon support. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to let us know as it is a bit of a new style of content for us. We had a blast exploring something new and creative, but if you guys would prefer that we stick to the meta, just let us know. Also, be sure that you don't miss out on the next release on our channel. We're just about to hit 500,000 subscribers, so be sure to smash that subscribe button, it would mean the world to us. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.